only thing I can do after not showering in the morning that doesn't look.
They may not love it, but I do. I love the name.
That's why I keep trying. It was long enough.
All right, well, it's about time to get started here. Let's see. I thought we would kind of get started by just thinking through a couple of questions. The idea behind doing this study is that we can be better prepared to discuss kind of the reasons why we believe Christianity is true, why we believe God exists. So let me just see if I can get one or two volunteers. If somebody were to ask you, hey, I noticed that you talk a lot about going to church and stuff. I've never really been to church, didn't grow up in the church. Why do you believe that God exists? What do you feel like is your go-to or your strongest argument today? If somebody were to ask you, why do you think God exists?
I don't know if it's the strongest argument. I just point to the fact that all of creation and the beauty of it and how the whole environment works and works in concert. Everything works in concert together. And that just doesn't happen chance. And there's God who created it. And that's what I would point to, that we should be thankful for that. And that's where I would.
Good. Okay. So just the argument from design and order, right? Good.
Again, probably not the strongest argument, but why would you say he doesn't exist? Because it's really hard to prove that he doesn't exist.
Okay. How would you prove that he does exist? You usually don't go around saying, hey, why don't you believe in the flying spaghetti monster? Seems like you need to prove. Can you prove the flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist? Prove it. I'm going to believe it till you disprove it. Right? I don't know how. Yeah. I don't know how I would go about disproving the flying spaghetti monster. So. But I think what you're getting at too, though, is kind of would be like the ontological argument, which is more like, so most of the world believes in some sort of deity, but you're going to just buck the system and believe there's nothing behind in any of this, right? So, like even Islamists or Muslims, Christians, the major religions in the world, which most people in the world believe, most of them ascribe to some sort of deity. So the fact that that's been put in the hearts of most of the world, where did we get that, right? Why you would have to have compelling reason to believe, to convince me that something that most of the world believes. Like, we may differ on that belief and fine tune it, and one of them is right and the others are wrong, but you have to kind of really buck the system to totally reject any kind of deity.
So I would also, somebody asked me that question as you were, I would assume that they do not want to believe in God. I would assume just the opposite. I would assume that they would like to believe in God. They just want to know why you do.
Good, okay.
And rather than jump to a conclusion and try to go down a rabbit hole that you don't need to go down with it, keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, good.
Your question again, please.
My question again?
Yeah.
If someone were to ask you, why do you believe God exists? What would you say? What do you feel like is the most compelling reason for the existence of God? And kind of what would you say?
If somebody asks me that part of the question, I would just say, the Spirit of God in me tells me so. Because without the Spirit of God, I cannot be saved. I think the Spirit of God will convince me and teach me that God exists. Maybe if I'm passing through a problem, nobody can solve it for me. It's not about the financial aspect, but the spiritual aspect. I think the Spirit of God that is in me is telling me that God exists.
So, good.
I think the Spirit of God can relate.
Good. So, kind of your personal experience with living life, you can feel the Spirit of God, and that is a convincing, compelling motivator for you to believe that God exists. Okay? Yeah, Alan?
Depending on who it is and what the situation is, I would tend to go towards probably Dawson's, but then there's the other part of me that would give a personal experience in how he has transformed my life, and how I used to be this way, but the more that I understood of what he wants of me, I'm now this way. And because of that, he's provided me many opportunities to fail, and I'm trying to succeed in following his desires.
Okay, good.
And my worldview, my shape, my mindset is not as negative and pessimistic as maybe it used to be. Right? You can give certain things that maybe has specifically changed me. Right?
Yeah, good. So, just the transformative power of the Bible, and again, kind of like your experience, your personal experience with interacting with the God that you've been taught, confirms in you that he exists. Good. Yeah.
And since I was baptized, I've been experiencing some changes. I'm no more a slave to sin. I see that my life is changing because I see the Spirit directing me. Ever since I've baptized and I know the truth, I'm no more slave to sin. You know, that can keep on coming.
Good, good. So just slavery to sin and the experience of being free from that. Good, okay. Good. I think for me, one of the most compelling arguments that I usually go to is the morality argument. Like if somebody says, why do you believe that God exists? Then I would say, because I feel like there is obviously a right and wrong. Everyone appeals to it at some point in their day, every day, maybe many points in their day. They are appealing to some standard of right and wrong. The same reason that I don't just come in here and mow you all down and take your stuff. Why would I not do that? Because that would benefit me greatly. I wouldn't do that because there is this innate standard of right and wrong. And if there isn't if there is a law, a moral law, that means there is a moral law giver. Something started this idea in every person that there is a good and a bad. Even skeptics say, why do bad things happen? Well, what made them bad? What classifies them as bad? Like, So I think for me, I would just say that that's really compelling, that there is a standard to which we all generally adhere to of right and wrong. And we can all agree that some people are very, very wrong in what they've done. And even people who sit in jail and justify what they've done, right? Because they don't want to be wrong. Why don't they want to be wrong? Why is that wrong? Is it just social pressure, or is there really a moral standard? Okay, good discussion. I think it's good just to kind of think about what's my elevator speech for why I believe what I believe. If somebody were to approach me, maybe have something in your back pocket like, okay, this is what I'm going to go to if somebody ever asks me why I'm a Christian. And again, I think Alan hit on it, and I think this is what Michael was hitting on too, is I want to know a little bit more about you so I can come at it from the right perspective. I want to meet you where you are, and maybe asking, why do you not think God exists? What is your basis for questioning his existence? And then it'll help me try and cater to what it is that's your hang up. All right. So let's start. So I sent out an email yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to read pages 100 through 114. But what we'll do is we'll finish up chapter 6. I guess this Wednesday is the first Wednesday of the month, so we'll do our separate classes, right? And then next Sunday we'll start on chapter 7. And I think Jace is going to pick that up. So we'll finish up chapter 6. If there's anything that you read, that you want to discuss or want to point out, please just raise your hand at any point and we'll go there and do that. Otherwise, I'd kind of like to just go through the 3 questions that I asked in the email and just kind of get your input, and if we can discuss that. So one more thing I forgot. This is on page 99 of the book. I think this might be a really good elevator speech. And that is, he points out that there are at least 12 separate facts, and I'm like, I don't know, 5 lines down. He lists at least 12 separate facts that are agreed to be knowable history by practically all critical scholars. Okay? So even the skeptics and critics of Christianity, most of them, if not all of them, will concede that these 12 things are true. Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. You can't historically deny that. He was buried. His disciples despaired. The tomb was found empty. Disciples believed they later saw literal appearances of Jesus. Like you may say that, that he didn't really appear to them, but they at least believed they saw appearances of Jesus. They were transformed from doubters to bold proclaimers of his resurrection. This message was the center of their early preaching. They preached this in Jerusalem. The church was born and grew rapidly. Sunday was their primary day of worship. James was converted from skepticism to the belief in the resurrection of Jesus. And a few years later, Paul was converted, believing he had seen the resurrected Christ. So all that really depends on the historicity of the New Testament. It is a reliable historical document. And so you have to, at least skeptics will concede all those 12 facts. So that might be a really good place to start too. Do you realize that skeptics, critics of Christianity, must at least concede these 12 points? If they at least concede these things, like, you've really got to push hard against it and turn a blind eye to a lot of confirmed truths. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm saying that very well, but I find that pretty compelling. Like even skeptics believe certain things. Okay. So then the very next paragraph, it says, on this basis, it is argued that no purely naturalistic theory explains all of these facts and the actual bodily resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation of all the facts. I feel like there are lots of sentences in this book that don't quite make sense. They were not edited very well, but basically, I think it's Occam's razor that the simplest explanation is probably the right explanation. The simplest explanation for the New Testament is that Jesus really did resurrect from the dead. Like that's the simplest. You have to really jump through a lot of hoops to just throw out and ignore all of history and all the record. The simplest explanation is that, hey, this really did happen. So I thought that was a good point to bring out. Anything else that you want to discuss before we go ahead into the historicity of the Gospels?
I'm sure you'll get there because it talks about
Maybe
it.
not.
You know, there's a lot of outside sources also that you can rely on as basically, again, validating that the Bible has, it has validity, right? There are events that did occur. There are things that even if you look at the flood, there are records of other peoples that show that evidently there was something that happened in that area, you know. And there's a lot of people that will argue against, you know, how old the earth is based on everything, but you could also go back to a lot of folks feel as though the flood would have been a pivotal point, which is why you see the strata that you see and how things change so quickly. And it's not nearly as an old of a, it depends on, again, where you're going with the discussion.
Yeah.
But
yeah, most of the one of the things that I read or I heard recently is there are population models that try and predict the population, the growth of the population. How fast are we going to grow? We've got this many people. We've seen kind of in recorded history how populations, there are wars that kill a lot of people and natural disasters that kill a lot of people, but then the birth rate is usually this. And if you look at those models and it will trace back to, it'll reverse predict back down to Noah and the ark and his sons and their wives. Like if you start with them at that point and use the population models we have developed today, then it'll say there should be about 7 billion people on the planet. What do you know? That model predicts the age of civilization that is consistent with the Bible record, right? Good. Okay, so first, before we talk about some of the points that he makes, the first question I ask is, if the Bible is the inspired word of God, why would the author point out the internal evidence of the historicity of the Gospels, epistles, and Acts? Like, why is he spending time doing this? I think we're all on the same page with this, but I just kind of wanted to flush that out and consider why he would point out the internal historicity of the Gospels and the other writings.
The point is to point out that it's not unreasonable to believe that the Bible is real, and that we can use history and the information we have to come to the conclusion that it is. It's not just like, yeah, there is faith involved, right? But we have evidences, and there's a plethora of those that without being religious at all, without having faith at all, you can agree, oh, this is at least dated back to that time, and this is what these documents all said.
Good, good. Other thoughts? Okay, so we're all on the same page then. Good. Yeah, for me, it is doubly confirming that inspired scriptures are accurate, archaeologically, historically. Like, you can use the way that you would confirm any text, you can apply that method to the New Testament, and it not only holds up, but it shines brighter than any other document. So you can use those tests and those examinations, and the Bible confirms itself as well. Good. All right, any last thoughts on that? Okay, so in the first section of the assigned reading, so like pages, if you're in the book, like pages 100 to 108 or 106, there are 8 internal evidences for historicity on the Gospels. What are those evidences? We talked about one of them on Wednesday. Page 100 to 106. The title of this section is The Internal Evidence for the Historicity of the Gospels.
The one we kind of talked about Wednesday was that the gospel writers did not make an attempt to harmonize their accounts. So everything is not specifically word for word. Their accounts are not perfectly lined up. So there are some apparent contradictions, even though they might not actually contradict. One might say there was one angel, another might say there was 2. One says Jesus healed one blind man, another says he healed 2 blind men.
Good.
And that actually gives strength to the argument, because it wasn't them all saying, so this is what we're going to say, right? We're all going
Right.
to
Good.
agree to this. And so we
Good.
talked about how even in a court of law, if there are 2 witnesses that perfectly align, they get thrown out.
Yeah, there's obvious collusion, that they colluded together and came up with their story and ironed everything out together. So clearly they're lying, right? But the New Testament Gospels look like they're clearly eyewitness testimony, and they have the amount of variation in perspective that you would expect from eyewitness testimony. Good. I think we covered that pretty well. What's another one that he points out?
They don't exclude the negativity that people believe.
Okay, so it doesn't exclude negative accounts, people that didn't believe in Jesus. It's interesting that you would create a myth or fairy tale that says the fairy tale isn't real, right, in it. But there were people that rejected Jesus and his messianic nature, his divine nature. They rejected it, and that's included in this story. Good.
Even people like his brother, that would be pretty strong evidence to
Yeah.
say, well, he must not be who he says he is, because his brother lives with him and says he's not who he says.
Was skeptical at first, yeah. Good. So maybe that would fall under the one at the top of 101. Gospel writers included passages that place Jesus in a bad light, right? So if you were going to create a fake narrative, you would remove all that. You would not put any of that stuff in, right? Jesus is called a drunkard. I think he used the King James Version wine bibber. Haven't heard anybody being accused of a wine bibber lately. but I think I get the gist of that. They call him a madman, demon possessed. His brothers didn't believe in him, right? What else? What other skeptical or evidence that it's historically accurate?
Along those same lines, he talks about how the writers left self-incriminating stories about themselves in there, about the fact that they all fell asleep while Jesus was praying in the garden. So not only did they tell what really happened, they left the bad things about themselves in there.
Good, yeah. Yep, good. So they're self-incriminating stories. Peter denies Jesus. He cuts off somebody's ear. That sounds like reasonable suspicion for a crime. I think you could arrest him pretty easily since it's recorded history, right? What else?
Talks about how some of the things that are there make you question, like, what? Why is he saying the way he's saying? Because it talks about how, the Father is greater than I, right? Okay. So, but yet at the same time, there's other things that says that we are one and the same. So it feels like there's contradiction again, but is there contradiction? And yet he's proclaiming to be the king, but yet he's saying that, well, I'm not the king that he's not saying that I'm not the king that you think I am. He's saying it differently, right?
Yeah.
He's saying it, and they still don't get it.
Right.
And we, as readers, do we sometimes wonder the same thing? Like, what? Like if you were reading it fresh, without the knowledge, and you're thinking, huh? Who is this guy, right?
Right. Yeah. Maybe that's kind of under the general heading of the gospel writers left difficult passages in the text. One of them, I don't think he mentions this, but one of the chief ones is, if you don't eat his flesh and drink his blood, then you have no part with Jesus.
Right.
That does not, like if you hadn't heard that all your life, then you would be really skeptical of a person that said, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood, or you have no part with me or the Father. And rightly so, the Jews were like, could you say that a little, again, into the microphone, please? I want to record that because I'm taking this straight to the high priest. So they wanted to kill him because of those statements. And there are still difficult passages, like difficult parables. The parable of the unjust steward that gets fired for not being a good steward, and then Jesus praises him for going in and manipulating the accounts so that he looks good and he makes friends. That sounds like stealing and forgery and fraud, and Jesus says, good on you. That's a difficult parable to wrestle with, right? So it's not just the easy, simple stuff that the gospel writers recorded. Some of it is even hard for us to understand with the advantage of hindsight.
And I've even wondered if they understood it themselves.
For sure not.
Even maybe John more so, because he wrote so much later and had such a big perspective looking back. But some of these, you even wonder, did they understand fully what was happening with the rich young ruler and the message that Jesus gave to him? Or were they just like, I'm recording this as it was
A historical
said,
record,
and
yeah.
this is the story. And I don't know exactly what Jesus meant when he said this.
Right, yep.
Why don't you think about what is written about him saying that, I'm not here to bring the unity of the family. You may be against your brother. You may be against your mother.
All right.
There's going to be strife there. And that's not comfortable. Why would you include that? Right? There's a lot of uncomfortable things that Christ mentions, as well as the writers
Mhm.
that may be associating themselves around his life mention, why would you include those?
Right. So again, a verification that this is historical record, it's not curated
Yeah.
fairy tale. Anything else stand out to you? The gospel writers did not deny their testimony under persecution or threat of death, right? I think that's a pretty well-known apologetics point, is that most of the apostles died for their faith. And one might die for something they think to be true, but they weren't eyewitnesses of it. But for an eyewitness to die for something they know is true or not, either they would know, and they still go to their death for their faith. At the bottom of page 103, New Testament writers based their record on eyewitness testimony. He mentions 6 different writers and their claim that their record is from eyewitness testimony, right? So, and then I think we mentioned this earlier, non-Christian sources confirm basic gospel facts, right? There's lots of extra biblical writing with no claim of inspiration or any special source that just kind of confirms some of the basic things. Anything else stand out to you from pages 100 to 106 about the evidence of the historicity of the Gospels?
Not specific to the gospel, but for Old Testament, but that comment you just made, non-Christian sources confirming those facts. I find it interesting, like it seems like every few years, like, oh, by the way, we found another tablet buried in some archaeological site that we searched for because the Bible said it was there. So we went and found that tablet, and the tablet is from some Sumerian king or from an Assyrian king or something, talking about the events that happened with David or with another king, and they talk about either overcoming the Israelites or
Being overcome,
otherwise.
yeah.
And so it's just additional confirmation, like they're saying the same things that this text is saying. So I know it's Old Testament versus the Gospel.
Right, yeah. Archaeology has only, to my knowledge, only confirmed events in the Bible. Okay, all right, so last question. Under the last section, so he talks about this starting on page 106, he opens up this section of the objections to the historicity of the New Testament. So then he lists several, 5 or 6 different categories of objections, like what a skeptic or a critic would say to attack the historicity of the New Testament. Which one of those did you find the most valid argument, and or the hardest one for you to answer? And do you feel the author represented the objection well? Did he adequately answer the objection? What stood out to you in this section?
I think something stands out to me is this on page 111, long discourses could not have been remembered years later. So it's saying, you don't just have like a sentence or two here or there sometimes. Like Jesus goes on these what we consider chapter long, discourses on stuff, like Matthew 5 through 7, for instance. And so the argument can be made like, well, you're saying this is decades later, and you're telling me that this is accurate to what he said, right? I think that's one of the best, I think, arguments you could make of why you wouldn't think that about Bible scholars.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably the most most difficult one for me to argue, and that John, many years later, would remember pages of Jesus' words. Like John 14 to 17, it's like it's all red, right? So you're telling me that he remembered everything word for word that Jesus said. That's a little bit hard to believe. So if somebody were to attack that, how would you defend? How would you defend that statement?
I think that's, in my perspective, where our attitude comes in and our heart comes in. Are we willing to respectfully and calmly bring the context?
Yeah.
That I don't believe because of one thing.
Right.
That might have drawn me in, but that's not, my faith is not built on a single block. This is one of the pieces, and I can understand why you struggle with that. I myself, it is simply because I believe, but can I show you these reasons why I believe? Can I explain my personal experiences why I believe?
Good. Yeah, so attitude is a huge part of this. Just remaining humble and kind and not becoming defensive, because that's not going to help anything.
I think as Christians we would say, well, they were, it's the inspired word, guided by the Holy Spirit, but I think you can even not discount that entirely, right, from our own thought. But if they're looking for answers, you can even think to a comparison from, our technology and the way that, like, I'm thinking about going through school years ago and thinking about memorizing things, etc., having to look things up in books, and the difference between now and then, and that we have a much shorter term memories, and recollection's not as good. We don't memorize things anymore. And then you think back to the oral traditions, right? Like through all the Old Testament stuff, and everybody memorizing like huge sections, or if not all, of the Torah. And so like you're placing the recording and the events of Jesus' time with that context of like, yeah, people memorize things that other people said, and that's just a part of it, right? But then you also look at, okay, Luke and Matthew being historians and record keepers themselves, and so you kind of tie those together and go, okay, yeah, they had a pretty good recollection of what happened. They were already in the business of double checking what different people said, getting different accounts, and reporting things accurately based on what they heard.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so kind of summarize, people's memory was different than ours. Ours is very short term. They didn't have distractions and a lot of the things that have made us have very small attention spans, right? So just in general, I think they would have been more likely to remember and memorize things than we are. The writer mentions that Matthew was a record keeper, and if you, the Chosen really leans into this. He's always carrying around a little tablet and he's taking notes everywhere, right? So he could have kept records of Jesus' exact words that were available for others, just as the earlier Christian writer Papias said that he did. So maybe when Luke was researching the matter carefully, as he said he did in Luke 1, he reviewed some of those notes that Matthew had preserved. Plus, as Jace pointed out, John 14 says, Jesus told them he was going to send the Holy Spirit, who the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I said to you. So it's possible that they had a better than normal recollection because of God's interaction with their spirit. Anything else jump out at you on those objections?
One of the things that I thought was interesting is that, some people will say goes through the idea that, you know, he knew Aramaic and Greek, so, you know, did they translate it the right way? And did he speak it to the disciples, those that were writing, in which language was he speaking to them specifically in, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, there may not be an exact that we know, but if they've translated it correctly.
Right. So the thing that I underlined, and because I do think that's the other thing too. When you read what Jesus said, in certain instances, one account is a little bit different than the other accounts.
Correct.
So do we have Jesus' exact words or not? Right? Were his exact words this that's recorded in this account, or this that's recorded in this account, or this that's recorded in the third account? Which one is it? Do we have the exact words? And he says on page 111, in any event, the exact words are not necessary to give a historically reliable account as long as the same meaning is conveyed. And I will say, I don't know if that really blows your mind and challenges your lifelong understanding like it did mine, but I think that's a bold claim. Okay, let me read it again. The exact words are not necessary to give a historically reliable account as long as the same meaning is conveyed. Like, I think that challenges a lot of what I heard growing up, like, hey, we have the words of Jesus. Well, would it completely erode your faith to think that the exact words are not necessary, but rather the meaning is there? And that's a challenge to me. And I would say I would not have been mature enough to say, yeah, I can handle that before too long ago. I'm not going to say how long ago. But, okay, good stuff. I hope that at least challenges your thinking and gets us talking about some of the critiques and skeptical arguments against the New Testament. So keep thinking about that. Dig in. I think he has a lot of good suggestions in the book, and we'll start with chapter 7 next week.